owning property in your personal name versus limited company. Hey, what's up guys? Hope you're all well. So I'm doing this video after someone commented on one of my videos about what is the best strategy and route for property investors buying either in their personal name or a limited company. Now, I am sure I have mentioned this on several videos before, but I actually haven't done a specific video on this topic. I don't really know why, because I should have done. It is a really crucial question for everyone looking to get started or who is already involved in property. And it isn't as clear cut or black and white as you might think. Now, before we get into it, I have to say I am not an accountant and everyone's circumstances are completely different. So I am just giving you my opinion and my view based on my very limited knowledge on this subject. Before taking any action, you should go and see an accountant and give them full disclosure of where you are, what you own and what you want to achieve, because that will determine the best route for you. And I'm going to leave right to the end why there is a really good advantage for doing both. But as ever, before you get started, I just need you all to do me a huge favor, and that is to smash the like button and don't forget to hit subscribe. So let's get straight into this. So buying properties in your personal name is likely going to be the first thing you do, the first experience of buying a property, because it will typically be a residential home for you to live in, which if you have been watching my videos, you will know that is my number one piece of advice to anyone looking to get started, especially in today's market with today's incentives. And this typically bleeds over into the next few properties that you buy for investment, and they tend to be within your personal name. And there is nothing wrong with that. And back in 2008, 9, 10, we saw a lot of people who own properties in their personal name who couldn't afford the mortgage, who decided then to rent them, and they had to obtain a permission to let from their existing lender, and they became what we call accidental landlords. And when the market started to recover, those negative equities or those negative cash flow in properties became good investments. Another good example why property is such a good solid place to put your money. So this seems like a really good place to start. Now, I am no different. When I first started investing in property and buying more properties, I did them in my personal name. This was a mixture of, at the time, the tax position was completely different. This was pre-2015. So the mortgage interest was 100% deductible as a full cost against my rental income. And today it is not. So that is a massive contributor. But also there was really no incentive based on my position. I had a small portfolio. I managed to stay under some certain tax thresholds, and I sold some properties, which means I realized some of the gains tax-free using my capital gains tax allowance. And I guess the other main reason is because really the only people that bought property in companies were large commercial property holders or corporations. There wasn't the mortgage lenders that there are today who did mortgages for people like me and you in limited companies. And that was one of the biggest blockers for anyone really considering this strategy. But moving forward to today, it definitely isn't as appealing to buy and hold properties in your personal name. But there are some incentives to do so that you will not get within a company. Remember, when you buy a property in a company, it's the company that owns it and benefits from it, not you personally. You can own the company 100%, but you must remember they are two separate entities. But what does that actually mean for the ownership and the benefit? There's really only one contributing factor that I can see for a buy-to-let investment, and that is when you sell it, you can take a capital gains up to the tax threshold. I think it's 28,000. Haven't sold a property in my personal name for a very long time. It may have changed, but there is a tax threshold that you can realize a gain for a property in your own name, even if it's a buy-to-let investment, completely tax-free. Whereas if you sell a property within your company, it will be liable for corporation tax. Corporation tax is a lot lower than capital gain tax in your personal name. So there is an argument if you were going to repeatedly sell properties, you would be better off doing it in your company. And if you're going to buy and sell properties, that's considered a trade, not a gain, which means that if you did that in your personal name, there are cases and there are arguments that the capital gain tax moves to income tax. And when we're talking about some of the gains that you make when selling properties, you can be paying 45% tax and some national insurance wrapped into that. So really, unless you're buying some properties to hold and the income, which we'll talk about in a second, keeps you below certain tax thresholds, and you may want to sell them, and the gain is going to be under 20, 30K, maybe 40,000 now, it's not really beneficial for you to buy and sell it in your personal name. It's more beneficial to buy in a limited company. But moving on to income. So we all know the tax treatment for any interest today isn't the same as 100% cost, and it isn't the same as it's accounted for in a limited company. Interest is still considered 100% tax deductible cost within your limited company. So to keep the numbers really, really simple, if I collect 100 grand in rent in my company a year and my cost based of interest is 50,000, then I'm only going to pay corporation tax on my profit of 50,000 before any other costs that can be deducted. And again, we're going to come on to that when we talk about companies. If you take your personal name, now the formula is a little bit more complex, and it does depend on how much you're earning through other means, or maybe you've got a job or a salary pays you every month. But these are all going to be contributing factors. The interest is no longer 100% tax deductible. And the way it's formulated is that the gross rental income that you take, minus any costs like management charge, repairs, furniture, anything else that you can offset against the rental income, is added to your gross income, and you are put in the tax bracket accordingly. And the interest is only deductible at the 20% threshold, which means for every penny that you earn over the 20% tax threshold in your personal name, with all of your combined income, salary, second job, property rental income, capital gains, it all comes in together, and any interest costs is capped at 20%, at the 20% tax threshold. Now that might sound really complicated, and I'm definitely not going to get into examples and explaining that on this video. This is one for an accountant or for you to do some reading on the government website and put your own numbers in to understand your true tax exposure. But let me put it in the simplest terms. It isn't good. You are massively disadvantaged versus property in your company name versus in your personal name for collecting income over the 20% threshold. So if you are in that position, or you are already earning more than that in your job, or your goal is to buy lots of property, start buying in a limited company. However, before we move on to limited companies, there is a massive benefit owning properties in your personal name, which I think is an unsung benefit. I don't think I've ever heard anyone talk about it. And that is when you refinance. Now, when you refinance in the company, the money is considered borrowed money, so you don't pay tax on it, but the money is still locked in the company. But it's great if you want to keep buying properties and you can keep going and going and going. And in your personal name, it's the same. You can borrow the money, and forget the interest charge for a second, how it's calculated versus your income from rental income. The money that you release from refinance is completely tax-free, but it's now money in your personal name. So you can use it to buy properties. You can use it to buy a car, but you can use it for anything and everything that you want to do. It's your money, not the company's money. It's also not money dictated to you to go and do something like another property investment. And I think this is massively appealing, especially if you're buying a property and you're increasing the value, or maybe you've lived in it for a little while and you're flipping it onto a buy-to-let. This is a great way of releasing cash tax-free in your personal name. And having cash in your personal name does enable you to buy some of the things that you can't buy within your company, and some of the things that you want to buy for your lifestyle, or some of the things you need to buy to live, or some of the luxury things that you can't offset in a company, like watches, supercars, all of those different things. And don't get me wrong, there are ways that you can do it, again, one for your accountant. But as you increase your debt balance, you increase your interest charge, and that interest charge is capped at how much you can deduct. Now, don't get me wrong, if you position it very well where your income is quite low, you can position the interest that you pay versus the small amount of income that's coming in to pay literally no tax and use the money that you've borrowed to do whatever you want to do. And that's quite a clever way of doing it. And this is still one of the reasons why I own not many, but still a few properties in my personal name. Not because I continue to increase the borrowing, but if I ever have to, I can realise some tax-free borrowing within my personal name quite quickly. Okay, so moving on to limited company. Now, limited company, because of the 2015 tax treatment of rental income, it has made this pretty much the go-to strategy for 99.5% of property investors. And there are other ways that you can do it, LLPs, partnerships, all of these different things, offshore, whatever. But keeping it very, very simple for today's market, for you and I in the UK. And personally, what I believe is the better strategy for building wealth, building a super portfolio, and the tax treatment of all types of income. This is even if you buy and sell, you realise the gain on an investment property, and for rental income, whether that's standard residential, HMOs and serviced accommodation. The key first benefit here, the obvious one, is that all interest charged for mortgages and any debt is offset against any profit that you make from whatever revenue. So that can be income from rental income. So unlike in your personal name, there's a massive advantage to buying properties in a limited company. So that's definitely number one. But secondly is when you realise some big gains. If you sell a property, regardless if you wanted to buy and hold it or if you were intending to buy and sell it, it doesn't matter in a company. The tax treatment is exactly the same. It's corporation tax, which today is at 19%. And yes, it is going up. I do get that. But today it's 19%. Now, 19% is by far the lowest form of tax that you're going to pay when you are realising a gain. Now, the money sits and is owned by your company, not you, but you own the company. And if you are intending only to buy more properties with those sums, then that is by far the most tax efficient treatment. And there is an argument that if you then take that money out below the 40% tax threshold in dividends, it's still more tax efficient by paying the 19% and paying the 7.5% dividend tax rate after all of your allowances versus personal income, or even taking that money out as a salary, which you can do. You can be employed by your own limited company and you can take your tax-free allowance, which I think is like £12,500. You can then take your dividend rate, which is £2,000 tax-free. And then you can take another form of salary up to the 20% threshold. But I think time you add your 20% tax and your national insurance, I think it is typically more tax advantage to pay the 19% and then take the dividend rate out. But I am open to debate this, and I'm not an accountant, and it does fluctuate what I do year to year. And we don't want to get too bogged down on the numbers. Now, one of the biggest advantages, I think, in buying properties in a limited company is the way you measure and report your growth and your wealth. Now, what do I mean by that? Now, any good accountant and any good company owner, property investor, company owner, will try and minimize the amount of tax that they pay. So they'll offset as many costs as they can to bring that tax bill down, all legally, all above board. But I don't really care who you are or what the argument is. When you get to a position of strength and a position of wealth and you're really active involved in property, those company accounts that are reported on Companies House every single year will start to show how well you are doing. Now, they're never going to show you the gross value of your portfolio. And they're never going to show the gross value of your rental income unless it goes over 20 million, because then you have to report full accounts. But what they are going to do is they're going to show the amount of net equity that you hold within that company after all said and done. And only on some projects. Some projects are treated as stock, so they don't show the equity. But when all that is said and done, you can go and check at Companies House to see if someone is who they say they are. If someone tells you that they are a multi-million pound property investor worth tens of millions, it's very, very, very unlikely that their company records in one of their companies, somewhere on Companies House, they're not going to be showing at least £1 million worth of equity. There is just only so many ways you can skin a cat, and there is only so many ways that you can reduce your reporting for tax benefits. And there are ways of putting money offshore and property offshore. I get all of that, but there is still some benefit, and there will be some ways and some properties that are held within the UK corporation structure and reported at Companies House. And even though the reported figure might be massively lower than what the person is worth, it's still going to show you something. It's still going to give them some credibility. And I think this is one of the strongest arguments, because I am definitely not the wealthiest property investor, and I'm definitely not the most active, and I am definitely not the most popular or have the most followers. But you can go on Companies House and you can see on some of my companies some wealth. I can't hide it forever, and I can't hide everything. And I think that's a really good reflection, because there's a lot of people who do a lot of talking, who do a lot of bragging. And you go on Companies House and nearly every single one of their companies are loss making. And I think that's a really, really powerful message. Also, I've talked about this many, many times. If you were to win the lottery or get a huge bonus from a massive corporate structure or get paid off a redundancy, whatever it is, you have to do something with that money. And typically, when all is said and done, you've paid some taxes, some people put that into property. And that money sits there in terms of equity within that deal. And they produce an income and a return on investment and a yield and all of those things. And a great way of measuring someone's wealth is cash in the bank and assets and equity. And I think when you are buying properties in a limited company and you are reporting equity in some of those properties on your company house records, this is a great way from going from A to D without going through B and C, without having to realise gains, without having to pay tax, and without having to reinvest. So if you are buying properties and you are refurbishing them and refinancing them and releasing cash, you are leaving equity. And it's that equity that I report on Companies House on some of my property deals. Not all of them. I can't do it on some of them. And definitely some of them are not in a position that they can be reported just yet. So it doesn't show everything. But it is still a very, very good way of measuring your own success and your own performance for that year. But also putting money into a deal is in the most tax advantage way. You are literally never ever moving the money to pay tax on it, to have it in a property to produce you income. And I think that is the biggest benefit for owning property in a limited company name. And there are other tax benefits long term. You can take money out in forms of pensions, which reduce corporation taxes. And you can backdate this for 3 years. And you can do it for you, and you can do it for your partner. So you can literally offset pension contributions on hundreds of thousands of pounds worth of tax. You can take money out completely tax-free by directors' loan balances. So if you have invested money into that company personally, you can take that out in drawings every single month, completely tax-free. And if you own shares in a trading company by another company, there is something called substantial shareholders exemption. Now, this is one of my hidden secrets that I've talked about on another video. You can, instead of selling properties and paying tax, instead of selling companies and paying tax, and instead of selling assets and paying tax, you can sell companies owned by other companies. And under substantial shareholders exemption, they are exempt from any tax. And when you are talking of hundreds of thousands of pounds, if not millions of pounds, we're talking about very, very large tax bills. So for me, to finish, limited company ownership for property is a no-brainer. Get the structure correctly. Have one for trading properties. Have one for trading income. Things like serviced accommodation is trading. Things like businesses that run within those companies, they produce trading income. Have another one for investment rental income only. And have a structure where those shares are owned by a holding entity. And make sure that you remain at the top of the tree. So, I hope you found that useful. I am so sorry for the length of the video. I thought this was going to be a quick 5-minute video. But any questions, leave me a comment below. And any suggestions for any other videos, feel free again to either leave a comment or ping me a message via Instagram. But look, that's it from me. Have a great weekend and I'll catch you all on the next video.